Our father was arrested in December. The Russians took him to jail. We didn't know all that time what had happened to him until the moment we met him, by chance, in Russia. So our father was arrested in December, just before Christmas, and put in jail. They came in the evening, the police. The policeman had come from another town to arrest him. It wasn't policemen from our village. For a long time we thought that maybe he had been killed. We didn't know anything about his fate. They didn't allow him to write to us at all during that time. It was already 1940, and soon we were deported. He also didn't know where we were, so they took him to a jail somewhere in Russia. I was the oldest son. I was almost 16 years old, maybe 15. I was born in 1923, so I was 16 and the head of our family at that time, with 6 younger siblings, 1 brother and 5 sisters. My mom, my brother, and 4 sisters, so 5 of us, because 1 sister stayed behind when they took us away. At night, when the Russian soldiers came to take us, they came at 4 o'clock in the morning and arrested us. At 4 o'clock in the morning, 2 Russian soldiers, Russian agent soldiers came. Russians from the eastern part of Russia. We were told that we had half an hour to pack our things. They ordered me to stand next to the wall, as I was the oldest, and told my mother to pack the children's clothes. You have half an hour, and you have to leave your house. That's how it was. My mom packed a little food, a little sugar for the children, anything she could take in such a short time. They took us away in the morning. It was dawn. You could already see a little bit of the morning light. They come at 4, so it was before 5 in the morning when we left. Anyway, there was light outside when we were leaving. They came on sleighs. There was 1 horse. They put my little sisters onto the sleighs and they traveled by sleigh 4 miles to the railroad station. So the children were on the sleighs, and my mom, 1 sister, and I went by foot. One of my sisters had stayed with our grandparents that night. They lived very close to us. She wanted to stay with her grandparents that night. She loved her grandmother. So she wanted to stay. And this soldier said, "Good, you want to stay? Stay." He let her stay. Those 2 soldiers didn't have any attitude towards us. They weren't typical communists. So she stayed with our grandmother, and us, they put us into the freight cars. There was 1 small window in the car, with bars, and a hole in the floor for us to use as a toilet. This sister of mine, she came to the railroad station. People could come and see us. So we asked her again to come with us, but she wanted to stay with our grandmother, and so she stayed with our grandmother. They put us into the cars. This train was very, very long, maybe 20, maybe 30 cars long. They packed people from all over our region into the cars, settlers like us, policemen, teachers, influential and important people of the region. Everyone was arrested at once. We traveled through Moscow to Arkhangelsk. The train stopped sometimes, and then they gave us a very thin soup and a piece of bread. We slept on bunk beds. It was cold. There were no heaters. It was so crowded that people were lying down one next to the other. It was like that. In the freight cars, the doors were in the middle, and bunk beds lined either side. People slept there, not only single families, but crowds of people packed in. It was very crowded. This is how we traveled. Sometimes they gave us food at the stations. This was how we traveled to Arkhangelsk. In Arkhangelsk, we had to get out. They divided the train in half. Half of us went to one labor camp in Russia, the other half to another. They didn't care whether or not they separated families. All of the sick people, the older people, and the children were put into carts. The rest of us walked on the river Dwina. We had to walk 200 miles. From Arkhangelsk, on the frozen river Dwina, in the heart of Russia. So we all walked on the frozen river to a camp in the Kolmyanka region. It took us several days to walk those 200 miles. I don't know exactly how many days we had walked. We stopped to sleep at night. And the next day, we would walk even further. Eventually, we got off the river Dwina and walked maybe 12 miles into the heart of the forest to our settlement. They used huge tractors and wooden carts to travel there. There weren't rail tracks, but there were grooves in the ice. And those tractors and wooden carts were like trains on tracks, the way they moved along the ice, in the grooves. It was very interesting to see one tractor pull 15 or 20 cars along on the ice. So as I said, they put the children, the sick, and the older people into the carts while the rest of us walked. Every family was given one very small room in the camp. The camp was built by Ukrainians who were deported from the Ukraine in 1930. By the time we had arrived, almost all of them were already dead. Only a few of them were still alive. And those few watched, administrated, guarded, and supervised us. So they gave us those rooms. This camp was a rather large one. Maybe 2,000 people lived there in wooden barracks. Immediately, on the second day after we had arrived, a Russian or a Ukrainian, I don't know which, the head of administration called us for a meeting and explained the rules of the camp. We weren't allowed to go anywhere. We weren't allowed to leave the camp. We had to report our every activity. But where could we go anyway? We were so deep in the taiga forest. There was no way to escape, only to be killed in the taiga. The taiga forest was so huge, the snow, the cold, the distance. He also asked everyone about their professions, what they did in Poland. He asked me if I could work with a horse. I knew how to work with a horse, so he said, "Good, I'll give you a horse, and you can go to work." The next day they gave me a horse, and I went into the taiga forest and worked on clearing it out. I removed the trees that had already been cut down. Other people had already cut down the trees. So my first winter there, they could only work in the taiga during the winter while the snow was there. It wasn't possible in the spring or summertime because it was so wet and muddy. They could only do this work in the winter. So I spent my first winter there removing wood. The wood was removed by the same huge tractors that I described earlier. All of the wood was taken to the river Dwina and left along the riverbanks. In the summer, we went down to the river. There they put us into a barrack, and we spent all summer making rafts out of the wood. The rest of the wood was piled onto the rafts and sent to Arkhangelsk. From there, distributed around the world.